I'm going to begin with an uncharacteristic statement for a moderator of a subject. Affordable housing has not been my issue. I've been more involved with transportation and land use issues in general, but that's another subject for another evening and another meeting. But wherever I went to learn about transportation and workshops and seminars throughout the state, I kept running into this fellow, David Fink, who was constantly talking about affordable housing, affordable housing, affordable housing. And I'll acknowledge that I'm a slow learner, but over time, the voices in my head held caucus and got together and came up with a unanimous decision that affordable housing, it's not just about me, it's also about people I care about and about other people I should care about. And it's not about now, it's about what I and others may need at some future point in time, even though we can't conceive of that at the moment. But I don't know about you and your lives. Life has a strange way of throwing us curveballs that change plan A, and suddenly we find ourselves in different circumstances with different needs, and maybe just with different wants over time. But there's a problem if we don't have different choices. So tonight we're hopefully going to explore what choices in housing really means. Now, when we talk affordable housing, you can put it into two categories. There's what I call capital A affordable housing, which is defined by statute and local ordinance, and you will see the local ordinance on the back of your handout. And there's small a affordable housing, which probably is better understood as diverse housing. Housing in various forms that meets various needs of people in different income levels and different life situations over time. And both of those are equally important to a community for its long-term sustainability. But unfortunately, we've become something of a monoculture of McMansions lately, which don't afford very much opportunity for diverse housing, and therefore we find that our older citizens who want to downsize are inclined to move out rather than to find something suitable for their incomes and their physical state to maintain. Our young people that we invest so much of within our school systems, excuse me, somehow can't find a place to come back to this town once they've graduated from college or gone out and seen their piece of the world. And that's a shame when you think about it, because the young people are the future of this community. And everything we do in preservation and conservation means very little if we don't conserve the most precious asset we have, which is those young people that find this place a good place to live and want to be a part of it. So we'll discuss both of these in the course of the discussion. Now, I would be remiss in saying we're doing something new tonight, because this is history. This is Guilford, and everything in Guilford has history, and this subject does as well. In fact, the history of affordable housing goes back to around the 1970s, from what I understand. Janet Poss, would you please stand? Yeah, it's you. Yeah, you know who I'm talking about. Stand up. Janet Poss, I understand, was the first to pioneer affordable housing in Guilford back in the 70s. I think it was just before I crossed the border when the guards were sleeping. But that was the beginning of it. And another prominent figure is Betty Augustine, who unfortunately couldn't be with us this evening. But if there's a Guilford equivalent to David Fink, who is persistent and ubiquitous on the subject of affordable housing, it would be Betty Augustine. And these two ladies are not the only ones. There are many other people who have been involved with interfaith housing, with Housing Authority, the Housing Partnership, and other organizations who have contributed to the affordable housing that we have. But we need to do more. And tonight, hopefully, we'll explore those needs and those options. At this point in time, I think you'd rather hear from people who know more about the subject than I do. So David Fink will give us a sense of the state as it relates to affordable housing and where Guilford fits in that and what we might consider going forward. David?
Well, good evening. Thanks for having me here. Thanks for coming tonight. I I have a feeling I'm going to be talking to a lot of people who know as much as I do. I see a bunch of you in the room, and I've seen you before, and you know about housing issues. So what I'm going to try to do, especially because I want to make sure that we hear from our panelists and hear from you, is to go through this reasonably quickly. I'm going to try to give you an idea of where Guilford stands in a state that doesn't have enough affordable housing, and maybe some things to think about. And then I think that it ought to prime the pump for a good discussion. So again, as we said here, we'll start off with a few facts that you ought to know about. Connecticut has very high housing costs, 8th highest in the nation. That's measured by rental costs, the National Income Housing Coalition, and home ownership costs, census numbers about the reported values of homes. 41%, better than 2 out of 5 people in the state spend more than 30% of their income on housing. That, as you know, is the threshold for affordability. That's bad for them, that's bad for your community, that's bad for the state. Because if you're spending that much on housing, you don't have that much left over for the other necessities: food, clothing, transportation, healthcare. Forget a movie ticket or a nice steak on Saturday night or a book or any other luxury. So it's bad for the economy, it takes too much out. The housing wage is measured, again, by the National Income Housing Coalition. That's what you have to make an hour to afford a typical 2-bedroom apartment. In Connecticut, statewide, it's $23.22. I'll show you later. It's higher in the New Haven, Meriden metropolitan statistical area. It's about $25. So that translates to about $49,000 a year statewide. And if you look at the Department of Labor website, about half the occupations in the state don't pay an average wage equal to that. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean that half of the people in Connecticut are homeless. What it means is that half of them are spending way, way too much on rental housing. Again, that's really bad for them. 133 of the municipalities, you are one of them, of our 169 municipalities, have housing stock that is skewed very heavily to single family. So there's not a lot of choice here. And we'll get to Guilford's number in a minute. And the reason I was explaining to some of our colleagues is that if you look at the US Census numbers, other than the lower Fairfield County towns that grew in the 50s and 60s, most of the towns in Connecticut grew post-1970. They built a lot of single-family homes for baby boomers like me when I was in my 20s. I know I still look like I'm in my 20s, but take it from me, I'm in my 60s. And in a lot of towns that have baby boomers, they have never created the kinds of downsizing opportunities that baby boomers now need. And they're all looking to create them. And then we have only 32 of the 169 municipalities with any affordable housing to speak of. The other 137 are well under 10%. So if you are lower income, working class person, you are confined to about 32 municipalities in this state. And that means, and unfortunately, a lot of those municipalities have fewer community services and overburdened schools. The reason, obviously, is supply. It's like that magazine article in the New York Times Magazine a few years ago, everything I had to know, I learned in kindergarten. Well, everything you have to know about housing is you learned in Economics 101. It's all supply and demand. So we're 50th in the nation over the last decade in units built per capita. Just haven't built very much. And what we built is not really what we need. What we built are a lot of 4 and 5 bedroom, 3,000, 4,000 square foot colonials, and a lot of 55 and older luxury retirement communities, which are really nice, with granite countertops and clubhouses and all sorts of stuff, but they're out of the way, and they're large. They're not really downsizing opportunities. We have not created a lot of the rental opportunities, the smaller ownership opportunities, the starter homes, none of that. So that's why we just don't have the supply we need. And you can see the results, as we said, high housing costs, less young, skilled, educated labor. There are just no lower rungs on the ladder for young people, whether it's our sons and daughters coming back after college and graduate school, Or, I mean, we're never going to get the 23-year-old, like my daughter who's living up on the Upper West Side in Manhattan. She wants to go to New York and live there with 3 other women in a tiny apartment, but run around all night. Great. But when she's 27 or 28, she may want to come back here, like a lot of our sons and daughters. And we don't have a whole lot of rungs on the ladder for them to get on the ladder when they want to come back after 3 or 4 years of going to clubs every night. Like I said, few downsizing opportunities. We also, as a public policy matter, have the worst achievement gap in the nation. Well, again, like I said, if we have a lot of lower income households confined to districts, school districts that have overburdened schools, and not a lot of weekend soccer, and not a lot of library branches, and not a lot of Boy Scouts, and not a lot of other community services, it's not rocket science to figure out that the enrichments in the schools and outside the schools aren't there for a lot of those kids. And like I said, we've had stagnant population growth because we haven't been able to grow our population because there have been none of those lower rungs on the ladder. Okay, so what we have now is some new potential, some new demand. There are new markets, there are new demographics, and I want to go through those. Housing is 32% of the average household budget, 32%, the largest single item. Next largest item is 19%, transportation. But if you live within a half mile of transit, your average transportation cost goes down to 9%. If you live very far from transit, it goes up to 27%. So here's Guilford with commuter rail. It's a gold mine if you can put housing near your transit, because it's going to cut a lot of people's transportation expense, and a lot of people are going to demand that housing. And if there's demand, the market rate unit prices will go up. That will swell your grand list. That's an opportunity. It's a valuable 10 percentage points. More about this new market. A few people have talked to me about, well, what about all these baby boomers? Well, Employee Benefit Research Institute, which does a lot of the pension calculations for companies around the country, put out numbers last year that said 56% of all current workers and 54% of all retirees have less than $25,000 in the bank. And that's unbelievable to some people. They say, well, I've saved more than that. But the issue for a lot of people is that after they get done paying for their house and after they get done sending their kids to school, their house is paid for. They have money in the house, but in the bank, they don't have so much. And they're sitting there thinking, well, do I have to get a new boiler? Do I have to get a new roof? Am I going to have to keep up this house? They want to get out of the house because they need to pull money out. Now, we know there are reverse annuity mortgages and other tools to use, but a lot of those people would like to go because they don't have that much in the way of cash available to them. Similarly, millennials, our sons and daughters, New York Fed put out numbers last year that said the average education debt for kids now is $24,300. Now that's average, and it's pulled up by people in the 30 to 39-year-old cohort who go on to graduate school, and the median number is $13,100. But I would propose to you that some young people with $13,100 in debt are not going to have a much easier time getting a mortgage, putting together the money for a down payment. Those people need to rent. Now, I once saw a number that said 94% of all of us rented at some point in our lives. I don't know where that number came from, so forget I said it. But I think we'd all agree, a lot of us have rented, and I'm sure if I asked for a show of hands, you'd all say you have. People need to rent for a while, someplace that's affordable, so they can save up money for a down payment and buy something small like my wife and I did, and then save up more money and buy something larger. Well, again, the lower rungs on the ladder haven't provided them. And more to the point, I think a lot of towns with a lot of single-family homes that don't have a way into those towns for young people are going to see their single-family values stagnate. I'm not going to say they're going to go down. I'm not going to say they're going to flatline, but they probably will not grow as fast or fast enough to keep up with service costs, because there simply is not going to be the demand for those single-family homes in a lot of towns. Now, I'm not going to tell you that Guilford will suffer a lot in that way, because it's a beautiful town, it's on the shore, and you have transit. So there will be demand for housing in this town higher than if you're somewhere in eastern Connecticut or somewhere off a transit line. But some towns are going to suffer by that. Point is, a lot of young people, even if when they can afford it, eschew that lifestyle. My kids don't want a single-family home with a white picket fence on a 1-acre lot, and they're never going to want it. So think about that. We have seen a move to rental. In part, that's been the economy, but you can see we were always higher in Connecticut in terms of home ownership. We always had about 71% of the population owned and 30% rented. It's shifted a lot, again, consistent with national moves. So now 33% rented, as according to the ACS numbers last year, and 67% owned. I told you, let's see here, where am I? Yeah, and the single-family median price, according to the Warren Group, is up from about $230 and change a year ago to about $255. So it's rising. It's rising sporadically in different places. There's some variation. Will it go higher? I don't know. It'll go higher in some places, not in other places. Like I said, I don't think you're going to see the demand for single-family homes that we had before. So where's Guilford? You're like a lot of other towns. I think a lot of you recognize that in 2008, the market didn't just crash, the world changed. And it's changed a lot of things drastically. The demand for housing, the supply of housing, what people are beginning to think about and where to put it. You're also being proactive, that's why you're here tonight. And we're seeing that in a lot of places. And I listed these towns, I was talking to everyone earlier. We have pushed the Home Connecticut program. We got it through the legislature, and I can talk about it later, but it's essentially a municipal incentive program, and you get to create mixed income housing where you want it, the type, the design. It's a good tool. It's not the only tool, but it's a good tool. So towns are able to apply for $20,000 grants to see if they can find locations to put it and to hire a consultant to do any kind of legal engineering, marketing work. As you can see, we're hearing from towns now we never heard from before. I mean, these are all upper, middle to upper class towns. And again, you know, as I was saying to Liza, I would like to think that it's because I'm so charming and persuasive when I go talk to them that's why they moved to do this. Well, I don't think so. I think it's because they're facing the same issues that you're facing. They haven't created the array of housing options that they needed, because they never had to. Cities have, over a couple of centuries, had to deal with generation after generation. They provided a wide array of housing options, not so much the suburban towns, and that's what you're facing right now. As I said earlier, 2.12% of your housing is affordable, and that's what Sid was talking about with big A and small a. The way the state calculates affordable housing, your units are affordable not because the market has deemed them affordable, but because a deed restriction deems it affordable and guarantees that it will remain affordable for 30 or 40 years. Or financing that the developer got from the government that said in return for that low-cost money, you will keep these units affordable for a period of time. So only 2.2%. You are, I don't know if that's called good company, you're in the company of a lot of other towns. 91 have less than 4%, and 137, as I said earlier, are under 10%. And as I said earlier, 87% of your housing stock is single family. So you're skewed pretty far over. Some towns have over 90% single family. And again, as we were talking about earlier, 3 out of every 5 structures in Guilford was built after 1970. That's when you grew. You are older than most towns in the state. Your median age is 47. Your median household income is relatively high. So 80% of median, and Home Connecticut provides an affordable set-aside of 20% of the units. The other 80% of the units are market rate, and the affordable units are for people at 80% of median. So that's why I put it up there. So if you want to start talking about Home Connecticut later, what we're talking about is not exactly low-income people. As a matter of fact, I've taken a lot of, I wouldn't call it ribbing, but criticism from some of my housing colleagues who say, well, why are you caring about people at 80% of median income in Guilford getting housing? Well, because those people need it, and you got to start somewhere, and we can talk more about the theory behind that. Your median sales price was very high, almost $400,000. And what that means is that the state median income, anybody earning that can't come close to buying a house in Milford. So if you're, in Guilford. So if you're out of Guilford and you want to get in and you're making the state median, no way. Even people making the town median income here, misqualifying by $21,000. And that's based on some assumptions we make about getting a mortgage, 4.5% interest rate, 10% down, etc. I talked to you about the housing wage statewide. That's what you have to earn an hour to afford a typical two-bedroom apartment. In this area, it's higher, as you can see. Now, here's an issue that comes up a lot. Your projected school population is expected to fall by a considerable amount by 2025. You are definitely not alone there. Statewide, school-age population will fall 9.9% by 2025, but that number is propped up very much by the cities, where there are many more people of childbearing age and a much higher birth rate. But we have a lot of towns that are going to see their enrollments fall 15, 20, 25, 30%. I think Westport is looking at a 34% increase. Now that doesn't mean, demography is not destiny. So it doesn't mean that that can't change. You could have an influx of young families with childbearing years, and they could all have 3 or 4 kids, and suddenly you'll have a higher school-age population. Or you could create housing for those people to move in. The point of this is simply to say that, let's say you created housing that brought in young families. You're going to have plenty of room in your classrooms to accommodate them without your school costs rising appreciably. Another thing to think about is, if you're going to have a townwide discussion about creating the housing options you need, you have to yourselves learn about the facts on property values and crime and school costs, and then that has to spread. And I've talked to a lot of people, very educated people in business and government, who say, well, you build more housing, you get more school kids. Well, it's not true. And there's been a lot of research. UMass did a big study 4 years ago that showed that school budgets are not sensitive to enrollment. They're sensitive to labor costs and healthcare costs and energy costs. Rutgers looked at every state, the actual numbers of families and the number of kids that moved in, and they found that in Connecticut, if you build a 1-bedroom unit, you get 0.04 children in a 1-bedroom unit. I don't know, I think a 400th of a child is about 3 inches high. It makes sense. What parent is going to move into a 1-bedroom unit with a child? A 2-bedroom unit, you get 0.25 children. In other words, 1 child for every 4 2-bedroom units that you build. Again, it makes sense. Most 2-bedroom units are going to be a young couple that want a 2nd bedroom for their friends and a study, or grandma that wants a 2nd bedroom for when the kids come, or 2 singles sharing. Yeah, 1 out of 4, you're going to get a parent with a child. 3-bedroom multifamily unit, you're going to get more kids. Similarly, a starter home, 3-bedroom single-family home, you get 0.67 children, or 67 kids for every 100 of those that you build, 2/3 per. So people believe you get 1 million school kids. Well, you don't. But here's the point. Even if you did, you're going to have room in your classrooms. So you need to deflate that myth in your town. You have to look on our website. We have testimonials from police chiefs and mayors and first selectmen in towns that have built mixed income housing, and the police aren't there every night. They're there no more often than they are any place else in town. It's not true who lives there. You have your nurses living there, your teachers and your cops and your firefighters. Everybody thinks you got gangsters and drug dealers living there. It's not true. Similarly, property values. MIT did a study 5 years ago that looked at property values next to affordable and mixed income housing. They didn't go up, down. They stayed steady, they went up, and we have anecdotal evidence to show that too. So you got to get yourselves and the people in town past the myths, and then you can have a discussion about this. The opportunities are pretty obvious. TOD, the market wants what you can provide the market now. If you can find places where you can put higher density housing for boomers to downsize or young professionals to move in within walking distance to that station, you can do a mixed income configuration where the market rate units will draw a very nice price for a developer. And you can make a set aside of the units affordable for some of those people who need and qualify at those income levels. And, and like I said, a lot of towns would love to have a train stopping there regularly. Your grand list will grow. I left in the back for you a piece that was in the Yukon Economics Department Journal this past spring, called Variety Adds Some Spice to Price, and what it essentially means, if you read through it, is that if you have a wider array of housing options in your town, it will keep values for all those properties higher, and it makes sense because what you'll have is churn. You'll have more buyers and sellers in the town, and you'll have not a lot of older people unable to get offers for their town. I mean, typically, if you can bring young people into your town when they're first creating families, they'll stay. Some will move, but a lot of them will stay. My wife and I moved to West Hartford because I was a reporter at the Hartford Courant. Stayed in West Hartford. Why not? And we bought in West Hartford. We bought again in West Hartford. So you get that churn, you get more activity, and it keeps the values higher. And Steve Lanza, the editor, did a statistical analysis, so you can read through that. Then again, you also have homes for the people you need. I just looking yesterday at the Connecticut State Teachers Retirement System report for 2012, because I wanted to update my numbers. 37% of the teachers in the state are over 50 years old. They're going to retire. Where are you going to have housing for the young teachers you want to bring into your school system? Over 100 towns in the state have volunteer fire departments. Old guys like me don't volunteer for the fire department. You have to have some housing for some younger people. I was talking to the chief in Cromwell, Connecticut 2 years ago. He was getting his firefighters from Windsor and Bloomfield. They were going to have to drive a half an hour to Cromwell before they could even go out to the fire. Kind of wonder if the people in Cromwell knew that, or whether their insurance companies knew that. I mean, it's hard, and I think because I talked to your first selectman a few years ago, I know you've had to go to the expense of replacing volunteer positions with career positions that are expensive. So, it's an issue to think about. And of course, we talked about school enrollments. Some towns have talked to me about, gosh, I guess we should have more kids in school because we don't want to have to close schools, because if we close schools, we're going to have to redistrict. And I was through that fight 25 years ago, and I don't want to be through that fight again. Well, I don't know enough about your school system to know if that's a big fight potentially or not. But if you have room in your classroom for kids, bring some people in who will buy housing that's expensive or valuable, and that'll help your grand list, and it'll help you in other ways. The dangers and risks, again, are obvious. The grand list stagnation we talked about. You lack the housing that you need for the people you need. A lot of those young people volunteer for boards and commissions and do things in the town that you don't really want to have to pay for. The school redistricting issue again. And again, aging towns have trouble passing budgets. Oxford got the idea about 6 years ago that they were going to create 55 and older housing because they believed the myth that 55 and older community doesn't bring you school children. So they believed that, and they thought, we got it knocked. We're going to bring in all these people that are going to live in all this great 55 and older housing, and it's going to swell our grand list and bring us a lot of property tax revenue. Well, they went through 5 budget referendums 1 year ago. 6 years ago. Because people were retired, their kids were out of the school, they didn't want to vote for the budget. So older towns have a harder time passing the budget. Again, this is all up to you. And there are some general and specific questions to think about. So let me get to those. Again, you have to decide, do you have the housing options you need for the people you need? And if not, what do you need? How much? Where do you want to put them? That's why I can tell you later about, you can get one of those $20,000 Home Connecticut grants and get somebody. I mean, George Crowell's a pretty good professional, but he doesn't have 96 hours in a day. Well, he can find a consultant who can help with that issue of identifying locations to do this. The answers, though, are not just from a consultant or George. A lot of towns are having charrettes or community meetings. Makes sense, like you're doing here. You know, what towns have found is that their residents get educated. Their residents also have very good ideas about what to do and where to do it. And plus you get some buy-in after a while, because everybody says, okay, I got the same IPs and I heard everybody else's ideas, and you're there. We have on our website, and I invite you to look at it, it's only 12 minutes long, a video called Idea Factories, which shows 5 different towns and how they handled this community engagement issue. Simsbury did a 7-day charrette, Hamden did a 5-day charrette, Colchester did 2 big public meetings, Bristol created a website where you can go on and you can like ideas and put up your own ideas. And what was the other town? I forget, I'll think of it in a minute. But anyway, it's a good video, and it'll give you some ideas on how to do this. And then the specific questions. So, what residents are you looking to hold on to and attract? What income levels? Who can afford what? What designs? Townhouses? Flats? Duplexes? Stack them 3 stories? You know, and it's got to fit the location. Do you want to do a townwide inclusionary zoning ordinance? I personally don't like them, and I can explain why later. But I like the principle behind them, that you want to create housing where you have people of mixed incomes there, so the doctor can live down the hall from the nurse and the lawyer from the paralegal, and nobody gets mowed. You can do an incentive housing zone with Home Connecticut, and that is essentially, George can probably explain this later, essentially legal spot zoning. You can slap down an overlay zone wherever you in town think that's a good place for mixed income housing. The legislature says it's okay, and the legislature will actually give you money if you do it. You can designate affordable housing zones through your zoning ordinance, and I think you've probably done a lot of that. Then, do you want to have mixed income housing or 100% affordable? Some towns need so much affordable housing, they'll build all the units, make them all affordable. Others say, no, we want to mix. The more affordable units you have, though, and Sela can talk about this later, the more subsidy you need, because no matter who you build the housing for, the sheetrock and the 2x4s and the nails all cost the same. It's just how much people can pay for it, and if they can't pay a lot for it, you have to subsidize it. And do you want mixed use? Do you want to combine your housing with commercial or office development? And again, the location will dictate that, the town's needs will dictate that. And do you want walkable communities? I would invite all of you to come to New Haven City Hall on October 1st, where Julie Campoli, who was one of the foremost designers in the country, landscape architects who wrote Visualizing Density, is going to come talk about her new book, Walkable Communities. People want walkable communities, especially people my age. I want to be able to walk to the dock or church or the pharmacy or dinner. So, and you can create that, and she'll talk about that day. So, that's essentially it. I hope I didn't run over. And I'm happy to stay and answer questions later. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, David. David's given us an overview of the situation in the state as a whole and where we fit into it. And now we're going to come down from 30,000 feet to closer to ground level with our panelists. Most of whom are from Guilford. We have Liza Jansen, Petra, the executive director of the Guilford Foundation, who will give us an understanding of what the foundation has been looking at lately and trying to understand this and other issues that they believe are major to Guilford's future. Peggy Britt is going to give us some insight into the human needs that she sees, and along with other human service professionals of the community, and where affordable housing fits into that. George Kroll, of course, knows the challenges and the opportunities for affordable housing as they're defined by our current zoning, and perhaps changes that we should make in those structures to be able to facilitate the kind of changes that David has discussed here. And finally, Salem Mosquera, who's with NeighborWorks as executive director, has managed a number of affordable housing projects in the New Haven region, and can give us a sense of what the challenges are in bringing those forward and making them work. This, of course, is something that is not familiar to us, and we know how much people love change. But I think that the subject of affordable housing should be looked at in a positive context. This is an opportunity to design not developments, but neighborhoods, to create communities, not just a zip code of sticks and mortar. And so when we talk about walkable neighborhoods, when we talk about multi-use development that can meet a variety of needs that we otherwise don't have near us. I don't know how many of you remember the old neighborhoods of yore. It's possible to bring those back, and affordable housing is a critical component of making that happen. So if this is something that we want, it's something that we have to commit to at some level to make happen. And I know we talk a lot about commercial development to relieve taxpayer burden in the town. You can't have commercial development of any significant degree if you don't have affordable housing of some significant degree. There's an ecology to all of this. There are a lot of pieces that have to fit together. And we need to think about it a lot more holistically than just housing and just commerce and just transportation. We have to make the whole puzzle fit. So let's begin exploring what you've learned, Liza, in your studies of the Guilford Foundation on Guilford's needs.
Sure. Do I get to stay here?
Feel free.
Okay, good.
Or come up here at your preference.
No, thank you. I'm fine. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Well, thank you so much for having this, bringing this together, Sid. It's very timely for us to talk about this. And David, that was really informative. Thank you. And in answer to your last slide, the answer is yes, all of them. Let me tell you a little bit about the Guilford Foundation's role in this, because we're not traditionally a housing organization, obviously. And I also want to acknowledge some board members who are here. Tom Pinchbeck is our president, Jim Mancini, and Sandy Ruoff are here from the board, and I'm sure, is that all we have? Oh, and Ed. Oh, duh. Hi, Ed. Thank you. So the Guilford Foundation is a private nonprofit organization. Our mission is to connect the people who care with the causes that matter to them. We do that by creating a large endowment that we then use part of the income from that to fund projects and to help move the community forward. Our mission is to make Guilford a better place forever. And I'm not saying this as eloquently as I did earlier, but you maybe get the gist of it. So most of you know us through grant giving to various organizations that you're involved with. We do provide grants out into the community to organizations. We raise private dollars and pool it into this endowment. The foundation actually started in 1975 when 5 families got together to make sure that money existed for trees on the Guilford Green. And since then we've grown to 25 different funds valued at a little over $1.3 million. However, our work is more than just about grant making in the community. We also try to address needs as they come up and serve as a convener and a leader within issues that are facing our community. So in 2011, the foundation actually worked with some consultants from the Yale School of Management to look at what are the real needs in Guilford. We wanted to be sure that what we were funding was actually of the utmost concern for our community. And among other things, what they found was that basic needs, including housing, was raised as one of the critical issues. So our board looked at that, and we have a small endowment, so we obviously can't create scatter site housing in the next couple of years. But we wanted to look more closely at that, more thoroughly. What did that really mean? What does this mean that we need housing within the community? And so what we did is we started talking to people. We talked to Selah and Ed, who's on her board as well. So, you know, what's available in Guilford? You know, there are 24 sites here in Guilford. We talked with Betsy Sturzel, who I think I saw, you know, and around what are the existing opportunities for affordable housing within the community. And then we realized what we wanted to do is to have a broader conversation. So in April of this year, we actually brought together most of the people from this panel, as well as Tammy DeFrancesco, who works with social services, who is also here, Lynn Landry, Betty Augustine, and others, to have a broader conversation about what are the true needs around housing in our community. And what that group found was, you know, not surprisingly, a lot of the same things that David raised much more succinctly than we, I think, came to at that meeting. What we learned was that the current housing options that are available through NeighborWorks and also through the Housing Authority have years of wait lists. You just can't get in there. They might as well be closed. We also made the point that affordable housing, for what we were talking about, is much more than the big A affordable housing. It's, you know, it's folks who want to come back, who graduated from Guilford High School and want to come back and have a place to live that doesn't, you know, cost more than they can afford. People who are getting divorced, they want, if you get divorced in Guilford, good luck, you know, keeping your kids in the school system. It's really difficult. Young families, seniors again, who are downsizing, folks with special needs, and that's another big one, disabilities, folks with disabilities. The third thing we found was that the stock just does not exist. We need apartments, the broad arrangement. Again, it was like everything on your list. We just said yes, please, to all of them. Multifamily, scatter site, et cetera. And also regarding the transit, we do have this fabulous opportunity for the train station down in South Guilford, but in North Guilford, where there is more opportunity, there is not great transportation. So, you know, Guilford is a very long place, a big, wide community. And then we tried to prioritize sort of what group would we want to serve if we could, and what we talked about was moderate to low income, and it included everyone, you know, families, but moderate to low. You know, moderate means, well, I forget what your figure was, but it's, you know, it's not low income, and it's not $100,000. It's those folks who fall in between: teachers, firefighters, others. Families, disabled, young married folks. So we had this good conversation. Many of you were here for that. And so what we've been doing since then, so what can the foundation do? Again, we don't have an endless empty pocket. But what we are trying to do is two things. One is we are exploring recreating an organization in the community that can serve as the advocate and as well as potentially do some services within Guilford. The Guilford Interfaith Housing is it corporation? Now I'm stuck. Housing, what?
Guilford Interfaith Housing Corporation.
Corporation, Guilford Interfaith Housing Corporation, to serve as an independent entity to address this issue, whether it's through advocacy, whether it's through service, whatever. We're just exploring putting this group together that can move forward and investigate more clearly some of these issues. And it will be not the Guilford Foundation's Interfaith Housing. It will be a separate and distinct group that we help move forward. And the second is that through our grants committee, we are looking to fund in the next year, and this is new to us, is to really look at funding issues relating to housing. We're not quite sure what that means yet, but we are going to focus next year on housing needs because we've recognized that that's a priority. I catch everything? So that's where we are.
Thank you, Liza. Peggy, can you help us put a human face on the subject? Because affordable housing is kind of an abstraction in some ways, and sometimes I think we have difficulty understanding that people very close to us are people very much desirous and in need of it.
Sure. Women in Family Life, if you don't know, we have a sort of a broad mission of helping women and families in transition. And that means a lot of things sort of through a lifespan. And we start with adolescence and go through retiree. So we see people at various stages of life, and very often they come to us in crisis. We have a lot of programming, but we also have an informal referral system that we call, and people sort of hit a brick in the road and they don't know where to go. Often they find their way to us, and we help connect them with Tammy and social services and other organizations in our town and in the state. We get about 400 to 500 calls and walk-ins a year, and about 12% of those are around some sort of social service need over the last few years. In the last year or so, it's sort of trending toward 20%. So we're seeing more and more and more people calling at sort of the end of the rope. They've used all their resources and they're not quite sure what to do because there's not a safety net. When I talk to people about housing, I like to talk about my entree into the housing need, and I like to say diversity of housing, because I think that's really what it is we don't have a very good diverse housing. If you're in a life transition and you want to move from that big house to a small apartment, very often you're moving out of Guilford, and very often you're not even able to make that move because you can't sell that house. But my first introduction to the need was probably a few weeks after I started my job. It was a terrible rainy, stormy spring. I think I've gotten used to that stormy weather in Connecticut here. But a woman walked in, and she was beautifully dressed and very optimistic, and you wouldn't think she had a care in the world. And she came to drop off some papers or to ask a question, and asked if she could use the bathroom. And I said, sure, showed her the bathroom, waited till she came back out to see if she had everything she needed, and she complimented me on how nice our bathroom was. And as Liza knows, it's an okay bathroom, but it's not the nicest bathroom in the world. And so something about that just struck me. So I kept her talking for a while, and as it turned out, she was living in a tent in Hammonasset State Park. She had a business. She had leveraged everything to try and save that business, including her housing, and it all fell apart. And there was no safety net, so she put everything in storage, packed up, moved to Hammonasset State Park. And over about 3 or 4 months, we were working with her to get out of the park and out of that stormy weather, and that's really where I understood the sort of the dearth of the diversity. There wasn't housing. She had gotten herself a part-time job in retail, making $20,000 to $30,000 a year, and we helped her figure out a budget, and we realized maybe $70 or $700 a month was what was really comfortable. Well, as George can tell you, the rentals in this area, you're not going to find that. And so it was a real struggle to find a way to get her back onto her feet and moving back on her path. And we find that over and over with families that are going through divorce. They often can't afford to move out. They're still living together in a divorce situation, which is horrible for the children. And the ones that break our hearts the most, I guess, is the domestic violence cases where women will often stay in very unhealthy and dangerous situations because they have no way to take their children and move elsewhere. I think my worst day in housing was I answered the phone one day, and it was one of my colleagues in social services from another town, and she said to me, "What do you do when someone calls and they need help with housing?" And I kind of didn't know what to say, and I said, "Well, I have them call you. Why are you calling me?" And it was sort of this like, oh my gosh, this is really bad, because she related to me. I hate when people call me around housing issues because there's not much I can do. And that's exactly sort of, I think, how we feel about it, is when someone calls and says, "I need help with my housing," we kind of take a deep breath, and we, a lot of what we do is reassure people it's going to be okay and help them develop a plan for that next stage in their life. But when housing is the core issue, it's very difficult in Guilford. And we're losing a lot of great people because they're moving out of Guilford to be able to transition into whatever that next housing need that they have for them. So, you know, I think George has a lot of great stats that when we talked about that, when Liza convened us all together, I was like, oh, you know, all my information's very anecdotal, and he has all these stats, and I'm like, that's exactly right. That's what we're hearing every day and every week. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
George, you're at bat.
Thank you. Yeah, I won't dwell on the statistics, at least as we know them, but I would like to focus on what Sid asked me to talk about, which is the zoning and planning and regulatory context for creating housing in Guilford, and specifically what provisions we have to encourage and or allow the development of more moderately priced housing or affordable housing. And then I'd also like to talk about what other roles or what other things the town can do to encourage the development of more moderately priced or affordable housing. It helps to understand what I'm going to talk about if we think of 4 different types of housing owners or developers. One is what you and I are, for the most part, homeowners. And I'll talk a little bit about what homeowners can do to create affordable housing. We have public housing authorities. In Guilford, we have the Guilford Housing Authority. And I'll talk a little bit about some things that they've done and what they can do, and we have some folks here from the Housing Authority who can expand on that. Nonprofit developers and owners also have played a role. Sala was intimately involved in the development of some housing in Guilford, and maybe hopefully someday they'll develop some more housing in Guilford. But we have nonprofit developers, and we have some specific programs in the context of zoning to support and help nonprofit developers. And then finally, we have for-profit developers who don't specifically target affordable housing development necessarily, but I want to talk about at least one example of a for-profit housing developer who's trying to create some new housing in Guilford and what some of the challenges are and opportunities in that area. With respect to homeowners, you and I, we can create affordable housing in our homes through several vehicles. The most significant one that we have in Guilford is the accessory apartment provision of our zoning regulations. Perhaps some of you have created or done accessory apartments in your homes. We have a very liberal zoning provision, and I can talk about the details of it more if you want to. But we have a very liberal provision that allows a homeowner to create an accessory apartment either as an addition to their home or in their existing home or in a detached building, a barn or a garage, should they so desire. And it's a very effective way, I think, of encouraging the development of smaller housing and more moderately priced housing. And it's a very popular zoning vehicle that the town has, and hundreds of units of accessory apartments have been created over the last few years since we've had that provision. We can liberalize the zoning that we have now for accessory apartments. We can we have a limit on the size of the apartment that can be increased. In my little one-page plan for affordable housing, which I have right here in front of me, the title of which is More is Better. We can liberalize the provision for accessory apartments. We can allow larger accessory apartments, and that's a very effective vehicle. We can also allow more 2- and 3-family housing units. We have a zone in Guilford around the center of the town that allows property owners to create 2-family units. We can create more zoning for 2-family units. Again, that's a situation where if you own a single-family home in one of these zones, you could divide it into 2 and make 2 units. The zoning provisions that allow that could be liberalized to allow it in other areas of town, to expand the area where that could be done, and also to perhaps allow in certain areas for the creation of 3-family housing units. As distinct from the accessory apartment, a 2-family or 3-family home can be investor-owned, meaning that it doesn't have to be occupied by the homeowner. The accessory apartment provisions on the way they currently work in Guilford require that the owner of the property live in one of the units. Creating a more liberal two-family or three-family zoning or a code would allow for you as a homeowner to create a three-family unit, move on, rent 3 apartments, and in all likelihood that would be a more moderately priced dwelling unit. We do have a zone that allows two-family units now. That could be expanded. Right now, we have a very liberal provision for nonprofit housing developers and for the Guilford Housing Authority. In effect, they're exempt from they're exempt from density constraints. As you know, the way zoning works in most cases, depending on where the property is located, there's a maximum density that's allowed, in terms of, usually expressed in terms of either minimum lot size or number of units per acre. In the case of nonprofit housing developers and in the case of the Guilford Housing Authority, they're exempt from that. So if they find a site anywhere in Guilford, regardless of the underlying zoning, they can create whatever density of housing works on that particular property in terms of the physical constraints that might exist, and subject to planning and zoning approval can develop accordingly. That's the way several of the nonprofit housing developments are done in Guilford, Apple Tree Lane in particular. The Guilford Housing Authority also falls under that provision. As I mentioned, we could create more zoning in the higher density zoning categories. In Guilford, we have minimum lot sizes zoning that range from 1/4 acre to 4-acre minimum lot size. Most of the undeveloped land of the town is zoned for 4-acre minimum lot size. We can liberalize that provision by allowing smaller lot zoning, thereby, at least in part, reducing the land costs associated with development, the land cost per unit, and perhaps encourage the creation of more affordable single-family homes. And those are the examples of some of the zoning strategies that we could employ, some of the things we do now, and some of the ways that those provisions can be liberalized. We also have, through a zoning vehicle which we call planned residential development, and another zoning vehicle that we call open space subdivisions, we have incentives for private developers to add affordable housing as defined in the zoning text, which I believe you have, and Sid alluded to earlier. Officially defined affordable housing. Developers can get incentives for including within their development units that are restricted for affordable housing purposes. Developers get additional density if they use those provisions. One of the provisions for the so-called planned residential development has been on the books since, I think, 1978. It's never been used by any developer. And there's some complex reasons why that's not the case, but we could work on that to encourage that type of thing to happen more often. In terms of other public activity that the town can engage in, we can provide infrastructure. One of the major limitations on higher density housing in Guilford, as most of you know, is that we don't have sewers. So we're always restricted by how much density can be created on any given site by the site conditions themselves and the ability of that site to support on-site sewage disposal. We can create community opportunities for sewage disposal systems, which would allow for higher density. And those of you who followed the Town Center South story, our transit-oriented neighborhood, you know that the town's currently studying the possibility of creating a community septic system to allow high-density development in the Town Center South area on the so-called Pages Lane property. The town owns a parcel of land there down by the Guilford Yacht Club, which if our feasibility study turns out to be positive, will enable us to create, in effect, a high-density on-site sewage disposal system, which we can then use to support or enable higher density residential development in the surrounding area. And hopefully some of that development would be affordable. And that's the type of thing we could do more of. There's no reason why, if that turns out to be successful, hopefully it will, we can't do something similar in other neighborhoods without building a conventional sewage treatment system with a sewage treatment plant with a discharge into Long Island Sound or something like that, which we know we don't want to do. We can also facilitate the provision of public water to new areas. By facilitate I mean pay for. in order to support higher density development in areas where we want that to occur. The town is a huge landowner, as many of you know. We can subsidize affordable housing development through gifts or grants of land, which we have done in the case of Apple Tree Lane. Those of you are familiar with that project. That was town-owned land, which we in effect gave to the developer. So in effect, so the developer had zero land cost, which enabled the development to be in combination with other subsidies that the developer was able to get, enabled them to create a development that was priced very affordably. The town could do a lot more of that. We own a lot of land. The devil, of course, is in the details in all of these types of programs, but it's something we can do more of and we should do more of. Finally, the Guilford Housing Authority, as most of you know, is limited by ordinance to providing housing for elderly and disabled families and households. There's no reason why that ordinance couldn't be changed, and the Guilford Housing Authority couldn't be encouraged and allowed to develop housing for families or individuals who are not elderly or disabled. The Guilford Housing Authority has a tremendous track record. They've done very successful developments, as you know. They're engaged in a new development right now. They have a tremendous track record in terms of development and as well as management of housing. And through a town ordinance change, they could be enabled to develop affordable housing for families. Let me finally conclude by talking about private development and the concept of mixed use, so mixed use development, and what private developers can do given the right circumstances and what some of the difficulties are for private developers. Some of you are probably familiar with the Route 1 West area of Guilford. Right now there is a project under construction, developer by the name of Angelo Moscato. He has a 20-unit apartment building. This is just west of the Anthony's restaurant and that complex there, if you're familiar with that area. He has a 20-unit apartment development that he's developed about 4 or 5 years ago. He has another 12 units under construction right now. It's rental housing, for-profit, private developer. There's no public subsidies. There is public water there. In the existing 20 units, he has 1 bedrooms, approximately 900 square feet. They rent for $950 a month. This is a moderately priced rental for Guilford. He has 2-bedroom units that are about 1,050 square feet. They rent for $1,250 a month. Both of those rents are plus in terms of utilities, so that the tenant pays all their own utilities in addition to that. The new units that are under construction, 1,250 square feet approximately, 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom. Hasn't established the rent yet, but it's in all likelihood going to be $100 or so more than the rents I just quoted for the existing development. So this is what a private developer can do in an area that's zoned commercially. Our commercial zones all allow residential development at fairly high density, so that a developer who wants to either develop solely housing can develop at 6 units or 8 units per acre. He can also do, or he or she can also do rental residential combinations like Strawberry Hill and Village Walk, if you're familiar with those projects, and create a more moderately priced rental housing unit. We have lots of land zoned in that category, and we can, in all probability, zone more land for that type of use. One of the things that Angelo Moscato told me, which I found to be quite interesting, he's owned that land for about 30 years. So effectively, and he has no mortgages on the property, so effectively he has zero land cost. So he's developing at these prices that I just quoted at zero land cost. If he had to acquire land on the market today and develop the same level of housing, there's no way it could be done at that level of rents. So those are some of the things that are important in terms of land use and regulation and zoning. Thank you.
Thank you, George. And Sarah, you've been heavily involved in making it happen. Can you give us some insights on what challenges that involves generally and perhaps as specifically as possible to our area?
Sure. Seila Mosquera, and I'm the Executive Director of Networks New Horizons. I do see few faces that are familiar. Actually, this reminds me about 16 years ago, or 17 years ago.
Wow.
When I first started working for this organization. The name, you might know the organization as Mutual Housing Association of South Central Connecticut. We changed the name to make it easier, but now I have to say that name and the new name, NeighborWorks New Horizons. We didn't win. But I started with the organization actually in the project here in Guilford. I was an organizer. And George and my predecessor were putting together a project working with families and a lot of potential residents that were in need of affordable housing. And now very low-income families. Teachers, we have tellers from the bank, we have a couple of disabled, elderly, retirees, and they just couldn't find a place to live. Our rent goes from $250 for a disabled person to $1,200, $1,300 for a 3 or 4 bedroom apartment. We base our rent on 30% of the gross income of the family or an individual. We have 1 bedroom to 4 bedroom apartments. So we try to accommodate and basically create a community. The project that George was talking about, Howard Woods, is now in existence 15 years. We use a program called Low-Income Housing Tax Credits. And I had to tell George that I just acquired the interest from the investor, and now we own it 100%. So I'll show you, and I have to stand up. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Apple Tree Lane or Wild Rose. So Apple Tree Lane was the first development we did, which is right here, this house. We took in consideration that we didn't want to do buildings. We wanted to fit within the town. It was colonial style. This is a 3-bedroom. It looks like it's a house, and it's a house, but it's, we rent it. So it's not a home ownership. So the first development, 13 units, we did it with the assistance of the town. The town leased the land for 100 years, and we were able to secure funding. And a program called Low-Income Housing Tax Credit we were able to raise the money. But the challenges were that it's very expensive. We haven't done more here because the land cost is pretty expensive. The infrastructure, we don't have sewer, so we have to do septic system. And before we can get to compete with applications or for funding, we have to spend a lot of money so that we know that it's feasible and that we can build the housing that we need. That's one of the issues. And the cost of construction is a very big issue. In Guilford or in the shoreline, we have ledge, so we have to blast. In Apple Tree Lane, we blasted a lot of rock. So that cost, sometimes we cannot justify it. The first development were 13 units. The second development, the organization raised funds. We wanted to make sure that we wanted to invest in the community. And we bought a parcel in Wild Rose. We had a lot of opposition. We wanted to build more. We built, at the end of the day, 9 units. No, we had 2, 4, 5, 6 units. And they look beautiful. They look like townhouses. 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. When we wanted to build, I think, 20 units, the compromise with the town and the community was to reduce density to the number of units that we were able to build there, and then build next to Apple Tree Lane. And we were able to raise funds again and combine some of the Guilford Interfaith Housing Corporation units into our development. And we rehab those units, and now, so we have in total 34 units of affordable housing in Guilford. Challenges through the management, 15 years, so we have seen everything. It's beautiful to see families and kids that have gone to college and then went on and bought their homes. So that's actually an opportunity and just a beautiful thing to see that the family were able to buy a home. Every 5 years, we have 1 or 2 families that actually move out and buy homes. Last year, we had 2 families. One came from Bosnia. When we first built the development, the family was paying $250 for the rent. He was working as a maintenance, making a little bit of money. And last year, I was looking, just for coincidence, I never go and look at families' incomes. But their income, they have been successfully own a business, and they were able to buy a home. They got to $120,000 for the year, a family after 15 years. So you see they're successful in how the opportunity that this family had. And we have, so last year we had 2 families, they bought homes, but in reality, our waiting list is about 5 years. So when social service agency call us for an apartment, a family cannot wait 5 years to be on a waiting list. So when we have the opportunity to have an apartment, then we send it to the agencies or we just market it, but we always have a waiting list that is there. So the demand is more of what we can produce. And we would love to do another development, George.
Right.
The other way that we have been able to build housing in Brantford, our town next door, is through the donation of a portion of the land. We worked with a community member. She was there forever in Brantford, and she wanted to make sure that her family house gave some benefit to the community. They wanted some senior housing. It was the needs for the community. And we built 17 units close to downtown. But the only way that we were able to do that is this brick building right here. And the new building has 12 units with elevator for seniors and one and two bedrooms. Was because she, half of the cost of the land was given as a donation to the nonprofits. So we were able to make it work in that way. Now, this area, because it's downtown, has utilities, gas, and water. So we didn't have to have that much expenses as in the same way as we did for the Guilford properties. And the one more just story that I always like to tell is that many people think that when you talk affordable housing, it's very low-income families and they don't work. Our families, because I have been now for 15 years managing those apartments, most of them work. Besides a disabled young person that we have, a retiree, everybody works and just don't have enough income. And their income goes up to $70,000, $80,000, because we do have market rate. 2 units are market rate within the complex. When we were doing Wild Rose, we had a big opposition. We went to public hearings. I don't know if you remember, George. And we had 30 people that were online to testify against the project because the neighbors thought that his house, the value was going to decrease because we were going to build affordable housing next to his property. After the meeting, I invited him to be part of the resident selection committee, because we want people to be integrated with what we do. In the design, we had a committee where people would come and be part of the design committee. And on the resident selection, we had also a group of people, neighbors, we invited to be part of the resident selection committee. So I invited him to sit so that he could meet and see the people that he was going to have as neighbors. And he did. He was the best member of my committee. He never missed a meeting. But after we selected all the residents, we had about 50, 60 people for 21 apartments. He came to me and he said, you know, Selah, I wanted just to thank you because this has been an experience that I have never expected to have. I have people that I know. I have seen families, a single mom because of divorce, she never worked, and having a beautiful home, now the person is homeless, basically. So I never understood what you guys were talking about until I felt it. I heard every story, and my heart is just in a different place. And that was a life change for him. And today, we still see, when I see him, he still remembers those days. And his house, actually, the price went up because the Wild Rose is Everett by Wild Rose. It's a really nice development. So, I mean, it's just because it's something new, he was afraid of something that it was just people were saying. But when he saw the reality of many of his neighbors, he changed, because the other thought was that people were coming from New Haven to Guilford. And it didn't happen that way. 80% of our residents in Guilford are from Guilford, and about 20% are from the shoreline area. We have Clinton, Madison, that they come to Guilford. If you have any questions?
Well, before we get into questions from the public, I think what I'd like is to hear a little bit of interaction from the panel and David among you in terms of anything that strikes you from what you've heard from each other.
Well, it sounds like we have a deal with sale in the
I
town.
think I have a deal with George.
If anybody has a site in mind that might work for us, let us know.
So I gather from the two of you that really, particularly as far as Guilford is concerned, the cost of land is a major hurdle in terms of making affordable housing feasible. Is that a correct inference?
Yes. From the perspective of the developers, yes. To make it work and to be able to charge the rents. We're not, the subsidy comes up front to build the place, right? So for the rents, we don't have any subsidy, and we do pay taxes. So because we are taxed as a market rate, but we don't pay market rate, is a lot of expenses on the operation, so we need to be able not to have much debt, and that's why we need more subsidy.
And that's essentially the same thing that Angelo Moscato told me, which I said, not to repeat myself, but he couldn't do the development even at these rates, at the $1,000 to $1,200, $1,500 a month rent. He couldn't do a development like that without, obviously has an opportunity cost for that land, but there's no cash cost associated with that land because he's owned that for so many years. With paying market rates for land on Route 1, there's no way you could do a development even with those kind of rents.
I think one of the things that Sayla mentioned is something that we find is that it's I sometimes hate the term affordable housing because it has this weird connotation of the old, housing complex. And I think what we really, when we talked last time as a group, came up with is a diversity of housing, because very often what we see is it's a family that's breaking apart and they've got one income and now are going to have to fund two households. And either one is going to either keep the house, maybe they lose the house. Very often we're finding they lose the house because they just can't afford to have that scenario. But they need that lower cost apartment while they're recouping. And a lot of the women we work with haven't worked in 10 or 15 years and now have to reconstitute their career to be able to afford it. And it's going to take 3 or 5 years and to them to get to this their next home ownership or condo ownership, whatever that might be. And I think that's really what we don't have here in Guilford is what do you do in those transition years when you need to recoup and you need to change direction? And when a couple of your examples really highlight that. It's people sort of moving through a transition phase, and it's not a 2-month transition phase or a year transition phase. Sometimes it's 3 to 5 years to really get back onto your feet.
I think given the fact that it is so, living in Guilford is very desirable, obviously, and there's no vacancy in any type of housing unit, subsidized or otherwise. To create housing that would be available on an emergency type basis, it's going to require a special type of developer and owner that maintains the housing specific to that purpose. in the housing authority and in the nonprofit housing and in the for-profit rental housing, there are no vacancies. Angela told me for the 20 units he has never had a unit vacant for more than 30 days. So you're not going to be able to create emergency type situation or find emergency housing situations as Peggy's been talking about.
We in Guilford have invested a great deal in terms of open space. And if housing or if land is a major hurdle in the economics of developing affordable housing and diverse housing, is it the kind of thing that Guilford should begin looking at a more aggressive form of land acquisition, or as you pointed out, George, allocation of some of its land holdings through lease to developer that can lower the cost? Because typically the private sector developer is looking for market rates of return within a conventional timeline. The advantage of a municipality is that if it invests in the land, and obviously it has vested interest in investing in the land for its own stability, then it can be the patient money aspect of that development and make it more feasible to attract private investment.
That's a rhetorical question, right?
No, it's not. It's a hand grenade.
Well, you don't expect me to answer that question, do you?
I'll welcome a response from anyone who feels game.
I think
Sailor?
Go ahead.
Okay.
move up closer too.
The
yes,
black
it's
microphone up there on
The
the stand.
question, I think it's a real question. I mean, we've been talking about land prices being a major deterrent to create affordable housing. Guilford owns a large amount of land, Sid pointed out, much of it purchased or acquired for the purpose of open space preservation. The implication of the question is, can't we take a little piece off here or there and give it to somebody like Saela and in effect create zero land costs for them, so maybe in combination with some other grant funds they can actually create some affordable housing? I think that's the type of question that probably should be asked of the, of the candidates running for Board of Selectmen and First Selectmen, not any of us. But, certainly it would seem like that's a possibility.
Candidate for first selectman, you heard. Don't hang out there alone. Give your fellow.
Okay, so how do you open it? How do you open it?
Make sure your competitors address it as well. David, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting, well, it's the fundamental point. I mean, the only way you can really create affordable housing is by lowering the land cost. Usually you can do that with density and allow the developer to put more units on an acre and spread his or her land cost over more units. You can't do that if you don't have the infrastructure to support it, but you can do that if you create the infrastructure to support it. So you have to, what you really have to do, and this is what a lot of towns are beginning to do, is be proactive. You can't really depend on the first selectman, because the first selectman is independent from the zoning commission, or rather, the zoning commission is independent from the first selectman. I go to see zoning commissions all the time, and I say, it's really unfair because we're asking you to do something you weren't elected to do. We elect zoning commissions or appoint them to be, in effect, judicial bodies. They sit there, they wait for a developer to come in with some blueprints, they look over the development, and they say thumbs up or thumbs down. What we're asking them to do is be more policy-oriented. Do we need more housing units? For whom? Where? And what towns are doing, and I'll give you an example because it gets at the land cost issue. Simsbury hired a consultant who went around and blind, did not consider the present ownership, the past ownership, the history of the parcel, the price, anything. Just looked around for the 12 best places to put density in and around their town center. It's good. It's a different way of driving around your town and looking around. The point being that they found parcels with owners who said, you know what, my parcel now is zoned commercial. In one case, industrial. It was a nursery in the middle of Simsbury, 1 block away from Hop Meadow Street. And the guy said, sure, you want to rezone my property? I can probably get a lot more for it if it's zoned residential than it is zoned as a nursery. I'll move my piles of topsoil and mulch and gravel to a piece I'll buy outside the town center. So, I mean, the point is that I think you have to begin to look at things a different way. Don't just look at the usual suspects of town-owned land or vacant properties or for sale properties. The town, the zoning commission, first selectmen, anybody, an activist in town can approach people who own property and say, what do you think? Do you want to sell? No, I don't want to sell. Well, what if the town rezoned this residential and you could get twice as much now for the property as you could have before given the market? You interested? Maybe not, but maybe yes. So it requires a different way of looking at things, and a lot of towns are doing it that way. And they're doing it sometimes without sewers, because the technology has increased. I was in Old Saybrook talking to an engineer there who deals in alternative technologies and group septic systems. I used to think, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, I don't know anything about septic systems. But I used to think you had to have a structure and then you had to have a big area alongside it for leach field. He's showing me 84 unit, 3-story Fairfield Inn that he put in, and the leach field is underneath the road that you drive in to get to the front door of the hotel. I'm told, because I don't know much about it, and George and Sale I'm sure know a lot, that it really depends on the parcel, the soil quality and what you can do. But that's the point. You have to look around. You have to find the places where you can do it, and then if you can do it, then the town and the developer and the landowner have to get together and figure out if there's a price that everybody can settle on, and some help from the town and some help from the state to get it done.
That's a very interesting comment, David. I remember when we were doing the transportation plan, we'd heard many people want a more walkable community, and okay, what's a walkable community? Is it just a place where you go and you take your dog in the evening and get some air? Or is it really a neighborhood center that provides some variety of recreational, commercial, civic needs and engagement? And so we did an exercise something like that, and we identified on one of our maps what we thought of as neighborhood centers, and frequently they were centered around schools throughout the town or some other major infrastructure or cluster of some kind of commercial development that could be added to at a neighborhood level. And so that's the kind of thing that can become a nucleus for affordable housing, for upgrading perhaps the potential of an area that might attract private developers who otherwise would not be interested. But it speaks to the creative aspect of creating neighborhoods, and in creating neighborhoods, creating affordable housing opportunities. Just a couple of quick statistics. I remember when they were doing the pre-disaster mitigation planning, the demographics that they had showed that we had approximately 2,500 people in town who were designated in the census as having some form of disability, and approximately 2,500 people in town over the age of 65. So there's undoubtedly some intersect between those two populations, but our total population is about 22,000. So we have approximately a quarter of the population clearly that are candidates for some form of affordable housing, perhaps more than they have today. We have, and that doesn't speak to the young people that we might want to be a part of our evolution in the demography of the town. So we have a considerable market or a considerable need in terms of those numbers to create alternatives. We're also the 15th largest town in the state in terms of area. And while we focus a lot of our attention on the area of the town green and now town south, perhaps there are a number of other areas where we can also be developing neighborhood centers that have a heightened level of community life, and yet don't create that crowded feeling that we're all so afraid of when we hear that word diversity, or density rather, and conjure up images of Manhattan. Are there any other thoughts that anyone on the panel would like to raise before we go to the public? Yes.
Just for information, this year and next year, if Guilford is serious about doing more affordable housing, are the years to do that, because the state has a lot of money for affordable housing. And we never know what happens after the third year, right? But if it's serious, I mean, the only way that it's going to work is a partnership, in partnership with the town, in partnership with the developer, the community, where they all can come together to develop what is needed in the community. It's not NeighborWorks saying, you need this. It's what the community needs and how we can join forces. But it's really the opportunity to be able to put something together and to be able to compete, because there are a lot of interest and a lot of for-profit developers coming out of town because of the opportunities we have. I went to Washington, I was in Washington for 2 days, and my colleagues from different parts of the country, everybody is crying that there is not funding. They cannot do any affordable housing because all the funding has gone away. And this state is kind of in a unique position where we have about 100,000. How much is, David, you remember how much for this year and next year is about $200 million for affordable housing. So we are in a very unique position is to be able to do something that it will really help the town.
For once, someone has some good news. This is great. Thank you.
And I think in the conversation, it's nice to remember, that diversity is, I think it's apartments, it's condos, it's the entry-level home, it's the retirement home, and looking at that and having a nice diversity across all of those, and as well as the subsidized housing, because we see those needs at all of those, price points.
Thank you. Liza, before we go to the question and answer section, would you like to give us any thoughts on where the Guilford Foundation may be moving next on this issue?
Sure. I'm very interested in hearing what folks have to say. So briefly, Selah, that's a nice segue for our initiatives to try to bring together community perspectives behind an initiative moving forward. So it's good to hear. If anyone is interested in learning more about it, it's very early on. This is just baby steps. We're talking about it. Nothing's finalized. No boards have been named. This is nothing to be permanent. But if you're interested in getting involved, continuing to be involved, we will. Please, I have cards. There's information in the back. Please do call us. Again, thank you so much for coming. And I'm very interested in what folks have to say and add before my bedtime, which is promptly at 9 o'clock.
Okay, well, we may go 15 minutes over because after all, this is Guilford and we started on time, which was 15 minutes late. But
No, 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock's good.
Okay.
That's it.
I can relate to that. My milk and cookies time is 10. Before we move to questions, I would just like to thank Donald Beckler, who's serving to videotape this meeting and hopefully get the message out to a broader community within town and hopefully get more people engaged. And so at this point, we'd like to open the discussion to all of you in the audience who were so good to come and to stay. I would ask that if anybody wants to make a statement, please come up to the podium so that we can capture you for TV. And anyone who just has a brief question they'd like to pose to the panel, if you just raise your hand, Elise will bring the microphone to you. Yes, ma'am.
I think it's great. My name is Amy Epler-Epstein. I've lived in this town for since 1990. I actually was involved with the mutual housing way back when it first came to Guilford, and I think what Selah had to say was a really wonderful and moving story about how stereotypes were changed by that process, and I think that's wonderful. I would love to see New Horizons NeighborWorks build more housing in Guilford, and especially, I think you're right, the Malloy administration has funds available for housing. That's an opportunity that we have now, and I think that would be wonderful if we could work on it. And I just wanted to say publicly, as a longtime member of the Guilford community who's put 2 kids through the Guilford Public Schools, that I think I totally respect and think it's important to be able to provide housing for all those different kinds of needs and community needs of people in Guilford. I also think that we are part of a larger community, and that our obligations and responsibility are not just for people in Guilford who need more affordable housing, but we all benefit from the cultural opportunities and the work opportunities in New Haven. I suspect I'm not the only person in this room who commutes to New Haven and works there every day. And I think our schools and opportunities and housing opportunities should be open to people, lower income people who live in New Haven right now and who would love to live in Guilford too, that's a way to enrich our lives and our communities here. So I would urge us as a community, I think that, the 2 Connecticut's that we live in and the segregation racially and economically that we have in this state is really a problem, and that affordable housing is an opportunity to address that. So I would urge this community to embrace affordable housing, not only for our neighbors who currently live in Guilford and are struggling to do so, but for our neighbors in the larger area and community around us.
Thank you. That's a very interesting comment. I had once facilitated a meeting on the Hill, and I felt a bit uncomfortable about it because who was I coming from Guilford to be facilitating a meeting very much like this, as a matter of fact, in the Hill neighborhood. And I discovered something utterly shocking. The folks there, in many cases in that meeting, want exactly the same thing for themselves and for their children as we do, with perhaps one major difference. We wonder how we're going to get our kids through college. They wonder how their kids are going to survive their youth. But they would very much like the same opportunities that we enjoy and that we take for granted here. Are there any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
My name is Ed Seibert, and before I make my comments, in the interest of full disclosure and transparency, in addition to being Liza's treasurer, I'm the Sailors Board president. So now you know my bias.
I feel the same.
2 things that I wanted to add to Sailor's conversation and a little bit to David's is that what NableWorks has done in Guilford is rental housing. But we also have done in a number of communities, and would be happy to do it here, is affordable home ownership as well. So it's not just rental housing, but we can do and have done affordable home ownership. What we have not done in this area is something that David didn't mention, but it's been very successful in Vermont, in Massachusetts, and a number of other areas. And it's called the Community Land Trust concept, whereby a developer such as NableWorks or a for-profit developer builds a house for home ownership and then sells only the house and not the land under it. And this makes the house a lot more affordable for someone. It's a very complicated process, but it does work. The big impediment to it for a number of years was that banks didn't understand it and wouldn't lend mortgage money until they started to learn about it and understand it. It's a little easier now. There is a process by which at the end of the time when the owner of the home then wants to sell it, the owner and the developer, who still owns the land, share in the gain on the property. But it is a concept. We talked about it at NableWorks, Sarah, help me, how many years ago? It was before you were,
Before my time.
it was before you were executive director, but you were on the staff.
About 12 years.
So it was at least 6 or 7 years ago. And we just couldn't get any momentum going. We couldn't get any interest in pursuing it, even though we had people from Vermont who had used it very successfully come and talk to us. But I think it's something that should be put into the mix here as we go through this process of figuring out what to do in the town of Guilford.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions, or let me, Tony, for one moment, let the microphone get to
Well,
us.
my name is Richard Tucker. I was the local first president of the Guilford community, the Guilford Housing Association, with Harvey Finkelstein. I was the president of the association that built the first homes on Apple Tree Lane. It was a great organization. It was a bunch of residents that all came together and worked to help each other out, worked hard, and really accomplished something very good in this town. And, if I can, I got a great education doing it, believe me. If I can offer any help in any way along the way, please, I will give you my how to contact me. I'd be very happy to help out in any way.
Tony, why don't you come up here so these can stay strategically located?
I'm Tony Fabiana. David, both you and George kind of touched on what I think is the underlying problem in this town at least, and that is the 4-acre zone. If any developer is going to create any kind of affordable housing out of any large tract of land, 4 acres, first of all, it's ridiculous to have a 4-acre zone in this day and age. I think there's only 2 towns in Connecticut, Guilford being one, Greenwich I believe is the other, that have a 4-acre zone. 4-acre zone means minimum 4 acres for a single-family home. And if you think about, if you do the math on a large parcel of land and divide it into 4 acres lots, you get very little yield. And developers, as Sid mentioned, are looking for the profitability of a development, and yield is where it's at. Now, George mentioned a lot of the liberalization that's taken place in terms of accessory apartments and other things that have been done to try to encourage some sort of affordable apartments within dwellings. To me, that scratches the surface of the problem. The real problem is the fact that A, we have 4-acre zone. B, we have no prospect in my lifetime at least of any sewer system. So you have a problem with the septic capacity, even with the new technology. You take the greatest technology and put it on a 4-acre lot, you're still going to get yield. So I believe that's the problem, and I think that's what needs to be addressed in this town. We need to look at how that impacts what we perceive to be the character of Guilford, and however you define that. The character of Guilford is what it is in your own mind. It's not a real concept. It's not anything that anybody else understands. It's what you understand it to be. And you've got to look at the 4 acres as a potential solution to this issue if you want to have your kids go off to college and move back into town and live into anything affordable. So that would be the first thing I would look at. And then you can look at the alternatives that you referred to and other issues that could possibly be on the cutting edge. But if you don't start with that, if you don't start with the basics, if you don't start with the basic problem, if that's the foundation of what we're dealing with, I don't think you're going to ever really achieve any type of real success in terms of developing affordable housing in the town of Guilford. The thunder that I heard, I thought, that's not lightning, is it? That's heresy.
Thank you, Tony. Are there any other questions or comments? Oh, lady, yes, Shannon.
I don't have the right to comment because I couldn't hear anything. That never stopped me before.
Absolutely, go for it.
I wish things had changed more in 40 years. It makes me very sad. And I think Tony had a very fundamental question. Thank you, Tony.
And thank you, Jen. And I guess at this point in time, we have probably taken the topic to its conclusion for tonight, but not forever. We've got a lot of work to do. so that Janet will be more pleased with us than she is at the moment, because Janet's opinion counts.
Nothing comes to mind immediately.
And I think we have a lot of opportunities here, too, and in our own best interest to pursue them actively. Ladies and gentlemen, would you join me for thanking our panel for joining us tonight? And be safe until we meet again.
Thank you, Sid, for bringing us together.